Wow, you really weren't kidding when you said you wanted to deep dive into Indian agriculture. Academic papers, reports, even some YouTube deep cuts. You've given us a lot to get through, so let's see if we can find the hidden gems in all this information and understand what's really at stake in the world of Indian agriculture, from its past all the way to its globalized present.
It is amazing how much ground we're going to cover. We'll really get a sense of how interconnected everything is, the decisions of individual farmers, global trade policies, and even what ends up on your plate.
Okay, so let's start by rewinding the clock a bit, back to the 1960s and 70s, the era of the Green Revolution. It was a period of just enormous transformation in Indian agriculture, driven by this really urgent need to combat hunger and achieve food security.
The aim was very simple: increase food production and fast. And they achieved this through a combination of high-yielding crop varieties, increased use of chemical fertilizers and pesticides, and expanded irrigation.
And it worked. By the late 1970s, India went from relying on food imports to actually becoming self-sufficient in food grains. That's a monumental shift.
Yeah, and that's where it gets really interesting. The Green Revolution wasn't just about filling stomachs. It really fundamentally changed India's position on the world stage. It set the stage for India to become a major agricultural exporter, impacting global trade patterns, and even influencing agricultural policies in other developing nations.
But like any revolution, I imagine there were some unintended consequences. Our sources point to a pretty significant environmental cost.
Exactly. The heavy reliance on chemical inputs led to soil depletion, water pollution, and even created pesticide-resistant pests, which then require even stronger chemicals to combat. It's a bit of a treadmill effect.
And I'm guessing it wasn't just the environment that was affected. Our sources mentioned growing inequality among farmers as a result of the Green Revolution.
That's a key point. You see, those who could afford to invest in the new technologies and inputs, often larger landowners, they reaped the biggest benefits. But smaller farmers, without the resources to keep up, they often fell behind, or worse, went deeper into debt trying to compete.
Our sources point to some pretty stark examples of this. We see it in Punjab's groundwater crisis, where decades of over-extraction for irrigation have severely depleted the water table, and the increasing number of farmer suicides linked to debt and crop failures. It's a tragic human consequence.
Yeah, it is a sobering reminder that progress often comes with a price. The Green Revolution's success raises some important questions about how to achieve food security without sacrificing sustainability and social equity, issues that India and really the whole world are still wrestling with today.
So the Green Revolution set the stage for India's agricultural success, but it also created a whole new set of challenges, especially when it comes to the financial realities of farming. Our sources paint a pretty concerning picture of rural indebtedness.
Yes, debt is a persistent problem in rural India, and the reasons are complex. Farmers often face these unpredictable weather patterns that can just wipe out entire harvests. There's also the issue of fluctuating crop prices that make it hard to predict income. And on top of all that, there are very limited job opportunities outside of agriculture, which leaves many feeling trapped.
It sounds like many farmers are caught in this constant struggle to make ends meet, and that often leads to some difficult choices.
Absolutely. Many turn to informal lenders who charge incredibly high interest rates out of sheer desperation. This creates a cycle of debt that can be almost impossible to escape.
Of course, the government is aware of this crisis, and we see various interventions aimed at alleviating the debt burden. There are loan waivers, subsidized interest rates, and even direct income support programs like PM Kisan, where eligible farmers receive direct cash transfers. But are these solutions enough? Or are we just putting a Band-Aid on a much deeper problem?
That's the million-dollar question. It's such a complex issue, and there are no easy answers. We need to understand the whole ecosystem of rural credit. Banks, cooperatives, families, friends, even institutions like NABARD, the National Bank for Agriculture and Rural Development. It's a tangled web.
Speaking of tangled webs, let's talk about the journey of agricultural products, how they move from farm to table. Our sources reveal just how complex and often challenging agricultural marketing is in India.
Most people don't think twice about picking up an apple at the grocery store. But that simple apple has likely gone through a really complicated journey. From the orchard to your shopping cart, there's harvesting, sorting, packing, storing, transporting, financing, a whole chain of events with potential pitfalls at every turn.
It's a system most of us just take for granted. But our sources make it clear that it's not as simple as it seems. At each step, there's the potential for losses, price fluctuations, and even exploitation.
One of the biggest bottlenecks is the lack of adequate infrastructure. Many regions just lack proper storage facilities. leading to massive post-harvest losses. And poor transportation networks make it both difficult and expensive to get produce to markets efficiently. Then there's the issue of middlemen.
Right. Our sources talk about the role of these intermediaries, who buy from farmers at low prices, and then sell to urban markets at a significant markup, capturing a big chunk of the profits.
Exactly. And it's not just the middlemen. Farmers are also at the mercy of price volatility. Prices for agricultural products can swing wildly due to factors like weather demand or global market trends. This unpredictability makes it incredibly hard for farmers to plan for the future, or even know if they'll earn enough to cover their costs.
This all sounds incredibly challenging. But are there any solutions on the horizon?
Thankfully, yes. Our sources point to some promising government initiatives aimed at making agricultural marketing more efficient and fair. There's the ENAIM platform, for example. It's an online marketplace that connects farmers directly with buyers across the country, increasing transparency and potentially reducing the role of exploitative middlemen.
That sounds promising. What about the minimum support prices, or MSPs, that we see mentioned in some of the reports?
MSPs are designed to act as a safety net for farmers. The government sets minimum prices for certain crops, ensuring that farmers receive a fair price even when market prices dip. And then there are programs like the Gramin Bhandaran Yojana, which focuses on improving storage infrastructure in rural areas to reduce post-harvest losses.
So it seems like there are efforts being made to address these complex challenges, but it also sounds like a constant balancing act, trying to ensure fair prices for farmers while keeping food affordable for consumers.
You hit the nail on the head. It's a delicate balance. And speaking of finding balance, our sources highlight an interesting model that has the potential to empower farmers. Agricultural cooperatives. They sound almost too good to be true.
Cooperatives. What exactly are they, and how do they work in the context of Indian agriculture?
It's actually a pretty simple concept. Cooperatives are groups of farmers who pool their resources and work together to achieve common goals. Think of it as strength in numbers.
So instead of individual farmers going it alone, they join forces and gain more leverage.
Exactly. Cooperatives can help farmers access better inputs like seeds and fertilizers at bulk discounts. They can also collectively market their produce, cutting out those exploitative middlemen we talked about. And they often provide access to financial services like credit and insurance, which can be a game changer for small farmers who often struggle to get loans from traditional banks.
This makes me think of Amul, the iconic Indian dairy cooperative. They've really shown the world just how powerful this model can be.
Amul is a fantastic example. They've not only transformed the lives of millions of dairy farmers in India, but also built a globally recognized brand. And what's fascinating is how diverse cooperatives can be. They can be involved in everything from providing inputs and marketing produce to setting up storage facilities, processing units, even offering training programs and insurance to their members.
It sounds like a one-stop shop for farmers, giving them the support they need to navigate the complexities of the agricultural landscape. But are there any downsides to this model? Our sources mention some challenges cooperatives face.
Of course, no system is perfect. One major challenge is management. Some cooperatives struggle with inefficient leadership, sometimes due to a lack of professional expertise, or unfortunately, even political interference.
Politics, that familiar culprit. And I imagine access to capital is another hurdle.
Absolutely. Securing funding to expand operations, invest in new technology, or provide adequate support to members is a constant challenge for many cooperatives.
It seems that cooperatives have the potential to be a real force for good in Indian agriculture, but they need the right environment to thrive. It all comes back to empowerment, giving farmers the tools and support they need to build a better future.
Couldn't agree more. Now let's zoom out a bit and consider the global forces impacting Indian agriculture. We can't talk about this topic without discussing the World Trade Organization, or WTO, and its influence.
The WTO aims to liberalize trade, which essentially means reducing barriers like tariffs, right? This can open up new markets for Indian agricultural products, but it also exposes them to greater competition.
That's the double-edged sword of globalization, and that competition can be fierce, especially from countries with heavily subsidized agricultural sectors. India constantly walks this tightrope, trying to participate in global trade while also protecting its own farmers and ensuring food security for its vast population.
Our sources highlight some of the specific challenges India faces in this globalized world. There's pressure to reduce subsidies, which could hurt small farmers. There are concerns about food security if cheaper imports flood the market. And there's the debate around intellectual property rights and their implications for things like seed saving.
You bring up a crucial point about the Agreement on Agriculture, or AOA. within the WTO framework. This agreement has been particularly contentious, as it sets rules for agricultural trade and subsidies. India has been actively involved in these negotiations, fighting hard to protect its domestic policies and ensure its right to support its farmers.
It's a complicated geopolitical landscape, and agricultural trade seems to be right at the heart of it.
It certainly is. Now, shifting gears back to the human element for a moment, our sources provide a poignant look at the issue of rural unemployment in India. This isn't just about numbers, it's about livelihoods, families, and entire communities struggling to make ends meet.
Right, the statistics come to life when you consider the individual stories behind them.
And rural unemployment has its own unique set of challenges. It's often seasonal, meaning there are periods where there's simply no work available, particularly in agriculture-dependent areas. This lack of diverse job opportunities beyond farming makes it incredibly hard for people to find stable income.
Our sources give some heartbreaking examples. Farmers sitting idle during the off-season, young people leaving their villages in droves to seek work in overcrowded cities, and a pervasive sense of underemployment, where people may have work, but it's not enough to lift them out of poverty.
It's important to understand that rural unemployment isn't a single monolithic issue. There are different types, each with its own causes and consequences. We see seasonal unemployment, which is tied to the cyclical nature of agriculture. There's structural unemployment caused by a lack of skills or education that match available jobs. Then there's disguised unemployment, where too many people are working in a sector that doesn't need them all. And we can't forget frictional unemployment, the time it takes for people to move between jobs.
It's clear that addressing this complex issue requires a multi-pronged approach. What are some of the strategies that could effectively address rural unemployment in India?
That's a question that policymakers and experts are constantly grappling with. There are no easy answers. But some key areas include investing in rural infrastructure to attract new industries, promoting rural entrepreneurship, providing vocational training to bridge the skills gap, and strengthening social safety nets to provide a basic level of security for those struggling to find work.
It seems like a daunting challenge. But it's crucial to remember the human faces behind these statistics. These are individuals and families whose lives are directly impacted by these issues.
Absolutely. And as we approach the conclusion of our deep dive into Indian agriculture, it's crucial to acknowledge the remarkable progress that has been made. This is a nation that went from facing famine to becoming a global agricultural powerhouse in just a few decades.
It's a testament to the resilience and ingenuity of the Indian people, especially the farmers who work tirelessly to feed the nation. But as we've seen throughout this deep dive, this success story is interwoven with some really complex challenges: environmental sustainability, social equity, and the economic well-being of millions.
The sources you provided really highlight that delicate balancing act that India faces. How do you promote economic growth without sacrificing the environment or leaving vulnerable populations behind?
One of the recurring themes that really struck me is the need for solutions that are both innovative and inclusive, whether we're talking about sustainable farming practices, strengthening cooperatives,
Yeah.
or navigating global trade. It seems like the key is to consider the needs of all stakeholders.
Yeah. What stood out to you from all this information?
Honestly, it's the power of empowering farmers. Giving them access to knowledge, technology, and fair markets seems absolutely crucial to creating a more resilient and equitable agricultural system. But it's also about fostering a sense of community, a sense of shared responsibility for the land and the people who work it.
I wholeheartedly agree. The solutions really lie in recognizing the interconnectedness of these issues. You can't address rural unemployment without considering agricultural productivity. You can't talk about food security without addressing climate change. It's all part of the same intricate web.
It's daunting, but also incredibly fascinating.
One final thought I want to leave you with: the future of Indian agriculture, and really global agriculture, depends on our ability to find solutions that are not just economically viable, but also socially just and environmentally sound. It's about finding that sweet spot where people, planet, and profit can coexist.
That's a powerful message to end on. This deep dive has been a real journey. We've uncovered the triumphs and struggles, the innovations and challenges that shape the world of Indian agriculture. It's clear that the choices we make today, both individually and collectively, will have a ripple effect for generations to come.